Hello and welcome to Art Marketers. This is episode 3. My name is Alexandra, and today I'll be interviewing Vanessa Butler here to talk about some of the experience that she has working in marketing, specifically in the arts industry. Vanessa, how are you doing today?
Fine. Thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for joining us. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you in this industry.
I started out my career with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and I really started out as a publicist. But back then, sometimes you end up carrying or wearing many hats. So 20 years as the director of PR and promotion at the Los Angeles Philharmonic and Hollywood Bowl. I, I did a lot of marketing while I was at the Phil. It just had a lot to do with having a small department, but I did start out in PR.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, you've told us a few of the notable names that you've worked with, but tell me some of the stuff that you're proud of that you've accomplished within this industry.
Well, um, I got lucky in a lot of ways because some of the things I worked on, we were right at the beginning of them. And probably every time a marketer comes to the table and the organization is going to hire you, they always say they have a problem and they think it's their subscription sales or it could be their single ticket sales. And 9 times out of 10, I find out that it's a problem all the way around. It's not just single tickets or subscriptions. So I was very happy with how we were able to turn around their actually there were subscription sales, their single ticket sales, and theater is had a certain way of marketing itself. They would usually wait 6 weeks before they announced, where they went on single ticket sale and stuff like that. But I had come from the, 20 years at the Hollywood Bowl, and we had 18,000 seats sell for upwards 70 concerts. And we had to
Wow.
put it on sale a year early. So I would say that by just bringing the experience of music into the world of theater, I was able to turn around how they thought about their inventory and how to let people buy it when they want to buy it, kind of uh, more that impulse buy.
Of
And
course.
we really, it was a huge increase in their marketing and in their ticket sales and their funnily enough their fundraising because we were moving into the theater was being renovated. And again, I had just come from the Hollywood Bowl and they were not doing very well in their endowment campaign. So the development director and uh, I worked on a program with her, but put it in the marketing materials, the subscription materials, because theater people really care about where they sit. They
Hmm.
like to sit close and see the actors.
Of
So
course.
with that program, we raised almost $1 million in 6 weeks. So that
Wow.
it was just applying some of the marketing practices back then to what people today, refer to as membership campaigns and stuff like that. I also opened with Dale Franzen and Santa Monica College the Broad stage, and that was different. Being there at ground zero, raised again, somewhat doing PR marketing and building a staff for fundraising. But in 7 years, we we really took it from a small theater that was just opening, and I was involved in their branding, among other things. And that's a different experience than marketing, but it's more of a storytelling kind of way. And so I'm very happy with how that worked out for the Bird Stage. It really gave, I mean, it's a theater opening in a big city that has a lot of theaters. So who are you going to be? What are you going to be when you grow up? And that was fun to work on that. It,
It,
it was fashioned after the director.
it's definitely almost hard
So
to stand out in a sense where you're kind of having to really figure out what makes you different or
different.
special in a sense. Now, I mean, it sounds like you said you wear many hats. What would you say your specific specialty in, or do you have various specialties?
I think I don't know that I have one specialty. I know that 20 years being a publicist really helped me prepare for branding, marketing. I even opened my own telemarketing company because we needed one. So I just opened one and I did it for the Broad stage. I think without the PR though, I wouldn't have been, I'm a very creative writer. And I think that goes back to my PR roots. Um, my favorite thing to work on is the branding or the storytelling. It's creating an image for an institution about who they want to be and how they want to grow and kind of what do they want to be in the long run. And that's a lot of fun. It involves ideas that are intangible though sometimes, so it's hard for
Mhm.
people to grasp it when you're getting them in a room and they want to talk about who do they think they are, what do they feel like. So I worked with art dynamics on a couple of these things. Actually, I've worked with uh Dream Warrior art dynamics since, my god, like 2010. I've I've gone to them and I've taken many clients to them over the years, and they were very good at a lot of things, but they specialize really in small theaters or small performing arts places don't have all the money to put into like the systems, for example, that I had at the Philharmonic, but they also don't need it. And Dream Warrior and Art Dynamics had a way of designing websites and um, platforms so that it could really fit a smaller institution,
Mhm.
which they didn't really have that uh, at the time. And so I worked with them at the Geffen Playhouse. I worked with them at the Broad Stage. Um, I did some time with Santa Monica College, and I brought them over, and they're still designing and redesigning all these people's websites even now.
Uh, I mean, wow, it sound again, how do you not drop the ball having to do all of these different types of tasks?
I don't do them all at the same time,
Ah, okay,
so I may.
time management.
I have my most recent client was a quartet, the Ensemble Galilee, and I really just handled their PR and marketing. There are some clients that I just work on their fundraising. Uh, so I never do it all at one time. The only place that really came together, and honestly, it probably had to take my experience with the Broad Stage was where it all came to play, and we hired people. So I hired the first marketing director they had, and by that time, Art Dynamics was already on board. They designed the website. So we hired a development director. Um, so that's partly in as much as we built the staff, and then I worked on the branding, and we had a outside consulting team to help us with the graphics and the branding.
Now, I think you kind of touched a little on it earlier, but I mean, what are some of the big struggles that you've seen within this industry, especially that you faced working in marketing?
Well, I had a boss once who said it's more important to be on time than to be right. I think that people, or the thing had to fight against most of the time or convince, is the managing directors and the general managers. They all really want that coffee table brochure. They really want that beautiful brochure that that looks nice and really is powerful and has their brand statement. But on the other hand, sometimes the programming or the actors are late. Like they don't have enough information, and then what that does and what it can do is slow down the ability to get that piece out. So I think that that's the struggle with everyone, is to let go that the timeline is more important, funnily enough, than how the piece looks, because you have to get it to people when they're ready to have it.
Hmm.
And sometimes that coffee table piece, which will eventually get produced, usually on the marketing budget, which doesn't really need to be. So there was many discussions about why, if I'm going to sell it with this fourfold and I out and it's cheaper, why should we? So therein lies that there's a balance in marketing that doesn't happen in PR and not really in fundraising either, unless you're going to do um, like a capital campaign or an endowment
Hmm.
campaign, and you have to have an investment piece, because that's what people are really doing, is giving you a lot of money. And so very often marketing people will create these beautiful endowment brochures, and I've been involved with many of them. But the thing that struggle is wanting to wait too long, then it mails too late, and then you're behind the eight ball right before everything opens, then it's really hard to catch up.
And I think
The other
too,
thing I thought was good. Oh, sorry.
I was going to
Go
say, I
ahead.
think too, I think one thing you touched on in terms of branding in itself is a form of art. And in a way, you almost can't rush that art. So when you're coming up with these pieces, they themselves are pieces of art. So it's kind of that you're dancing that fine line of, we can't let perfection get in the way of progress. We can't also just rush things just because, of the sake of rushing.
Right. Right. Whereas, though, if I have a deadline and I just send out a threefold color piece of paper and put the programming that I do have on it, I'll still be able to sell it, because most of the time when you go out to sell anything, you're basically renewing the current people.
Hmm.
You don't start out selling single tickets right away. So just a renewal piece can be very simple. And then the next step is to try to get those single ticket buyers that came last year and get them to subscribe. So there are many pieces that end up going out.
Hmm.
But the other big thing I wanted to say, and again, I think this comes from my PR background, um, relevancy is really important, because I mean, I started out in classical music, but how many pitches can you make about, the Beethoven cycle? You have to find a way to make it current and relevant.
Hmm.
And there was a play, it was really not selling, and it needed to make, it was about $1 million of budget that was going to be, more or less missing. And it was an old play. It's called it was an American playwright, and the play was called All My Sons. And it was just the fourth play of the season. The actors hadn't been picked. And the play is about a man who works in a factory during the war, and they make or an airplane factory, and they weren't doing a good job, and there were faulty parts. And as a result, their son, who had gone off to war, died in one of these planes. Now, it just happened to be that same day, or I was trying to figure out what is, obviously it's an old and well-known play, but it wasn't selling. In fact, it was probably so old that people didn't quite know what to do with it. The New York Times had read, there was an article at the time, I was reading the paper that morning, which is an old PR habit. And there was a man who was making the metal piercing jackets for the war in Afghanistan. And he had just thrown his daughter like $1 million birthday in New York at one of the fancy hotels. And yet his armor piercing jackets were not working. The boys were dying, and he's over here spending an outlandish amount of money. And so I just turned that around and made a quick mail drop. But I led more like a branding story into the what if your son, what if, and then, I made it relevant to what people were related to today with the
Hmm.
metal piercing jackets. It wasn't, I didn't have to be literal. That's another thing. You don't have to be literal when you're selling. You can be, imaginative. And then it sold out completely, because for
Wow.
all, like, it took one statement for everybody to realize that the play was really something that's even going on now in the news, where the soldiers are dying, and the equipment isn't working, and what are you going to do when it happens to be your son
It's kind of creating
or
those parallels
daughter?
so that it can be
Mhm.
kind of relatable.
Relevant to where people are today.
Yeah, that
And
makes
that's hard to
100%
do
sense. Yeah.
in a it's hard to do for an intangible thing. I mean, for example, I've always, the people who created ketchup, and the Hunts people, and the ketchup bottling, ketchup lasts forever, but a concert lasts 2 hours, and then there's another concert, and the play lasts about 6 weeks, but it's a very short shelf life of
Hmm.
this stuff. So you have to make it in advance. You have to talk about it in a way that's relevant. And then the third thing is, you just probably, COVID, I'm sure, has messed up that for a lot of people. About, they like to get, people like to be around like-minded people, and they liked going out. That's the other thing about performing arts that was really good. Today, I mean, I've seen some really creative things this year. I never would have seen them without COVID. All the live broadcasts, the opening of the Met, where they had the orchestra all over the country. It was really, some of those things are really good. And I know they're not leaving. I know they're going to stick around.
100%. I've definitely feel like I've seen a surge of creativity. People are stuck at home, and all of a sudden you're seeing some insane TikToks and same content coming out, and it's very interesting to see what.
It's very funny.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
of it's very funny. Yeah.
Definitely seems like some people have a lot of time. I'm like, that these are pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, if you had to do anything differently, what would it have been? What would it have been, knowing what you know now?
Well, what's funny is I actually started out in aerospace engineering. I had a degree from USC, but I
Really?
spent a summer internship right before I went to work at the Hollywood Bowl. I worked at KUSC Radio as a work study, and then I had a job. But I had the summer, and I went from there to work on the Olympic Arts Festival. And I would say, well, I did go to my job, and then about a month and a half later, because before I left, my boss then said, if you ever really want to think about work, I said, I don't have any qualifications to work here. She goes, no, but you have something completely different that nobody else has in this department. You have, there's the right side of your brain and the left side of your brain. And I had a highly developed um, technical aspect to my thinking, but I did not have any of the writing. In engineering school back then, you didn't have to write down anything. It's just formulas. So I went back. And if I had to say if there was anything I regretted, I don't think there is, because I studied for one field and then chose another. But I will tell you that without my engineering background, I think I was asked to join the PR department because right at that time, again, it was just coincidental. They had the nonprofit world was starting with the desktop publishing for the first time. And the first computers that made it into the Philharmonic offices was a system called the Wang. And it was one computer in a room, and they wanted the staff to go in and type a letter and send it up to management. And of course, they didn't do it all summer. And I was leaving, and they go, you know something about computers, right? We have to do this. We're going to get fired. So I go into the Wang computer room, and the reason they don't understand it is it's speaking computer language, which I knew 3 languages by then. So I set it up for them. And so you never know. I always say that you never know what career you would like. Go ahead and get a major and go ahead and do what it is, but also follow what you love. And I think I have never regretted once marketing in the arts. It's hard work. It's but it's rewarding. You're surrounded by creative people all day long. Many languages, a lot of free spirits, and a lot of stories. So I really wouldn't change anything about and I love doing PR. Marketing became was a bit easy because of my analytical skills. It wasn't that hard, but I did learn the writing at the Philharmonic. They sent me back to school,
Oh,
and
that's excellent.
I ended up loving that too. So I think and now when I do fundraising, a lot of people, when you talk to people, they don't always come from a marketing background, and they're doing they come from another one, and especially in the arts.
Hmm. It's kind of you're bringing in all of these other skills. Now, there's one point you touched on that I definitely want to kind of elaborate on in terms of you have this strong technical background, and I think a lot of people look at marketing as a very creative role. Would you
Hmm.
say that it is? I feel like now marketing has a lot more of the analytical aspect. I mean, would you agree with that in terms of it's not always that creative? It's a lot of
It
it's
isn't.
actually more on the analytical side, more of the scientific side.
You have the brand managers who work on the storyline, and you have the marketers that sell the have the drive the sale, and you have the publicists or the communications who talk about it. But it's really the top of that food chain is the brand manager. They keep the
Hmm.
dialogue of that creative conversation. In other words, a brand manager will keep will keep a marketer true to the brand that has been, decided, so that it doesn't get, if you're going to act like a king brand like American Express, you'll notice that their marketing people, everything has to go within a certain way and feel that feels like a king brand. Um, that's if you talk about branding in terms of archetypes, which a lot of people do, a lot of people who work on brands, to help organizations figure out their story, their own story. They will use the archetype brands. There are 12 of them, and they started out in uh, psychiatry. I mean, that they, client patients, they would talk about that. But a couple of guys at Stanford, oh, actually, a woman and a man, took that archetype format and created really what branders use today to give companies names. So the marketer is the person that takes that story and then sells it,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And there's media, there's print, there's mail, there's social media. They're the ones, and they work with promotions people that help, drive. Promotions is quite exciting. It's part of marketing, but a promotions person is not necessarily a marketer with the analytics that
Mm-hmm.
go behind, because the marketing director is in charge of the budget, making the budget, and within the and spending money. So in the end of the day, it's why they're more analytical. They have a big monkey on their shoulder.
Yeah, of course. And you
And
definitely have to go by the numbers, right? You got to look at the data and
uh,
see that these campaigns and these strategies are working.
and there's one that we did to talk about. It worked, but it didn't raise any money, but it had a huge PR value. We were trying to do one of the very first viral campaigns at the Broad stage, and we based it on our education program. And we decided to get more aggressive than we might normally. And so 4 days at the max, maybe 5, but I think it was more like 4. We bombarded our audience by email. We took over the home screen of the website. Okay, nothing happened money wise. There was a donation for the education program, but instead, because we'd taken the time to do the videos and interview the kids, and that's what I mean by bombarding. It was video shorts of interviews, and we had a huge PR. It was like a penumbra effect among our own people, because they wrote back and said, "Oh yeah, sure. Here's $100." It was also for a low amount of giving, but I didn't know we did all this. I'm so happy that you guys do. I mean, it had the complete and total opposite effect. So that was right in the beginning days of anybody even talking about doing something like this online. So it wasn't a total waste, but you find out that people, if they're part of your community, and they, whether they're first time buyers or long time subscribers, they want stories about your organization, and therein lies a marketer. I think that's something to remember if you're in charge of marketing, is that the stories also count, even though there is no ROI on it, and it's an intangible asset that it's an intangible feeling that can happen, but it's still very valuable because it's a long-term relationship that the consumers have with your organization.
A hundred
And
percent.
not that I never think of it as a product, but more like, a relationship that you grow. And they're very proud to be part of the Broad stage, because, um, I know our dynamics remembers this, because they were the one. I thought Nami was going to kill us on like day 3, but when you involve it's so important to have a real. I can't tell you how important Nami and May were in all these small typical things that we would try and fail, but they didn't. They hung in there with us. They helped us stay online and not crash. And it's they felt like more like a member of the staff. I also worked with them, brought them in on a project to Pasadena, who has 2 orchestras. The board of It's now called Musique, but Rachel Warby is the music director, and I knew her from the Philharmonic, and she asked me to come, and that they wanted to start a 3rd orchestra. I said, "Start a 3rd orchestra in Pasadena? Oh my gosh, what are you going to do?" So it just so happened again that there's an arts marketer, um, his name is Tom Wolf. He works a lot in nonprofits, and he makes presentations and he does a lot of research. And he had happened to just put out some research right around that time about the kind of orchestra that the people do want, that doesn't exist today. And that type of orchestra is what Rachel Warby fashioned her orchestra on. And then we needed to build the brand, and and it was just really a simple format. Is the people really wanted a place to go to listen to music, outside. I mean, it could also be inside, but the feeling has to be casual. For example, they can get up and leave or get up and move around. They can take pictures. Very often in the symphony world, you don't take pictures during the concert, but they did want to do that. And as it turned out, they're now almost 8 years old. And the idea of trying to create a new orchestra 8 years ago, it would be crazy. But, you know, and part of a lot of that has to do with Pasadena as a community. It's a smallish community, and they're very interconnected. But she plays the kind of music in a different way. And the other thing about it was, again, branded after the conductor. She liked those books that had those
Tabletop
coffee
books?
table
Yeah,
books.
coffee table
Yeah,
books. Yeah.
like something was like something about things about everything. Like on the cover, it had wheels, it had animals, it just something you always wanted to know about everything. And she liked the idea of making a concert where, and she's done very well with it. And again, I worked with Art Dynamics on the launching the website. All of it is that at her concerts, she will bring in an engineer, for example, from JPL, who actually a lot of engineers are classical music people. And but he did this one particular, she presents a graphic. Now at JPL, they have graphic designers to explain their projects better, visually. So she incorporated that designer and the the universe, and he had done a like a campaign for, I can't remember, it was for one of the satellites, and they put it to music. And so you learn something new, plus you have music. And that was an odd concept, but it worked, and it still works.
But
But
only leave it to the arts community, right? You got to have that
I know,
educational aspect in there.
but as a marketer, if you think you know something and you think you've done it all, you'll find that in fact is you haven't, because all these creative people out there still have these wacky ideas, and they come to you and say, well, can you do it? And you have to really, I mean, she had an idea of a thing, but to explain it like that would have been confusing. But then word of mouth, I said, it'll work as long as we get enough people and word of mouth starts to happen.
Oh,
There was one
100%.
concert where a teacher at Caltech, she was a nanomechanics professor, and she was a very good piano player, and she played a Bach partita and did a rap about nanomechanics. It was fantastic. So yes, you can, that's the fun part of the arts, and working with good people to help you get that idea out there. It's different than if you were a brand manager for Coca-Cola. Although I had the wonderful occasion to work with a woman named Lisa Strick at the Hollywood Bowl for about a year. And she really, I learned a lot about how they sell things that have long shelf lives, that never go away, that is the same packaging, that never ever changes. Like the Spam can, it always looks the same.
There's always that there's that lot of psychology behind it. There's just this, like, it's almost based down to the science. It's very interesting.
Right, and if you change the look of it, the people don't want to buy it.
Imagine a blue Coca-Cola. It's not going
Exactly.
to happen. It's what? That's not the same thing. Um,
And in those product lines, they have a lot of analytics. The marketing is, to some people, could be a little boring, in as much as they don't get to. They can create the story, but the story comes from a bigger idea.
100%. So they're not necessarily in control of where that story goes or where that journey goes. That story kind of comes, and it's their job to be able to take that story and turn it into campaigns.
To fabricate it into the different concerts or different plays or different shows because overarching on all of it is a higher brand message that, like for the Geffen, and also you can brand a season versus brand an organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, how do you stand out in a large city like that? I remember there are some things, as a marketer, that the American brand, the American, the word American, it has a very strong, people like it. It's a good word. It leaves people with good feelings
Mm-hmm.
if it's has America in it. So he happened that year to have all American playwrights. So that became the brand for that season, was just American playwrights. Well, that put it into some perspective, and it helped you understand that the Geffen is doing American playwrights this year versus what the other theater groups are going to do, because we didn't have the advertising budget to go up against the larger theaters. So we had to make a statement, and we called it the campaign was the American Originals.
Hmm.
So you
Very
never know.
fun.
But part of, again, I think without the PR background, I wouldn't have been able to so easily transfer between creative and then analytical.
100%. Now we're going to be wrapping up pretty shortly here. Thank you so much, Vanessa. But before we leave, is there any advice you could give to anybody who's thinking about doing any marketing within the arts industry? And what would your advice to them be?
Well, that it's changed a lot with the COVID has changed a lot of how people look at marketing, and the audiences. The typical audience for some of the performing arts is older, and that community is at most, they have run a higher risk of getting COVID. So chances of them going into spaces that are enclosed will be, I know will be different. So what happens is that there's got to be a new way to market to the younger group of people in a way that they hadn't thought about it before. Everybody always wants to market to younger people, but I think that the senior generation, who really are frequent classical music attendees and stuff like that, it's going to change. As a marketer, you're going to have to think of talking to them differently or giving them products differently than you did before. And I think a lot will go into marketing about, they'll be limited. You have to do the story of explaining how it's safe, which is not something, I've never had to approach that concept of how it's may or may not be safe, but you're going to have to bring in new parameters by which you will get the people to come back. Spacing, you can't fill the house, and then on one hand, it's small budgets and some of them are small nonprofits. So I know it's easy to say, well, it's on each individual has the choice, but some of the arts will be highly affected by that larger group of people who attended and supported them, and who don't feel right now about doing it. And how are you going to survive? How are you going to keep your one a marketer might, I could see many general managers asking, should we close down for the year, and I would say, no, don't. If you close, it's so expensive to open up again. It's as if you've got to do something, and which is, I think, what a lot of people have done. I've watched a lot online that I never would have watched before. So a marketer in the arts today is going to grapple with things that really the marketers before them have not had to, and everyone's inventing it along the way, including even something like this, the YouTube. This is a new concept. Obviously, you're young, but I'm saying is that that's what a marketer today would have to look at in the performing arts.
Being open to change, being adaptable in a sense.
Well, they're going to be the change itself. They're open. They are not even closed-minded to it, but the marketers, the mentors before them will never have dealt with it. There won't be any easy answers on, how do we ask people to come back, and how do we get them comfortable. And part of it is not in our control, but they do like the social camaraderie of each other. The people who in the performing arts, they like the same thing. I mean, the same old ad. There's an adage that's never changed about selling anything, is that you got to have your logistics straight. Like even if you take it down to trying out a new dry cleaner, you got to have your logistics straight. The product has to be good. Logistics meaning you got to get your tickets on time, you got to get the brochures on time, you got to have all that paperwork and everything done so that they feel like they know what they're doing. Parking easy, all that stuff, and then the product has to be good. And the other thing about that three part of the leg of sales was they like to go to places where there are like-minded people. It's like a community, otherwise they're quite isolated. Now if you knock that leg out from underneath that three-leg pedestal because you cannot go, what area can you go? And I think that'll be the challenge for if people, and I think they're going to have to be more creative, and not as analytical, because there's got to, you have to replace that third leg with something. If you know the product is good and you still have your logistics fine, well, how do you create the community, which people are doing online? It's just since everyone's doing it, it can get a little tiring. Like
Soon,
how many
soon,
Zoom meetings?
who knows? We'll see. We'll end up seeing some new TikTok trend
I
on
know.
selling tickets for orchestras, right? You never know. We'll see what works,
Oh my
right?
God, some of those TikToks were so funny.
Yep, 100%. Well, thank you so much for your time, Vanessa. Really
Thank you.
appreciated you joining us in our third episode of Art Marketers, and looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye. Okay, bye.